Good afternoon, Black Lawyers on the Move. If you can hear my voice, clap. If you can hear me. Thank you. Good afternoon again. We are about to get started for our final enrichment panel for this Black Alumni Reunion Weekend. And then I promise you all can enjoy the city and hopefully come on by the Balsa Soiree tonight. It's at 7 to 10 at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, which is on Aretha Castle Haley Street. If you've already registered, you should have already gotten paid up in advance, but if not, don't worry. I think our folks will be collecting money at the door or tickets or some credit card or something. So please show up. It's food and drink are included, as well as live entertainment by Gina Brown. For those of you who live in New Orleans, you may be familiar with her.
Should have led with that.
I should have led with that one. I'm sorry. Thank you, Gary. So I'm gonna turn it over now to our final panel, which is probably a really fitting way to end this enrichment session. And we've decided to call it the Civil Rights, Voting Rights and Empowerment Panel. And for those of you who got to hear Sherilyn Eiffel speak last night, I can't tell you what a great way to kind of round out our weekend, especially since we've tried to center this thematically on engagement, empowerment, and excelling. And so I can't think of a more dynamic group of folks to bring that topic to us. They wanted to center the discussion with a brief video, about 3 minutes long. So if you all will bear with me, I'm gonna get that started. And that was just to make sure everybody was starting from the same set of facts. So with that, oh gosh, I'm sorry. And I forgot, Natasha, our CLE administrator, has another housekeeping matter for you.
Well, only if you guys want CLE credit, come see me on your way out, okay? Thank you.
Okay. From currently. And now, a small video for your enrichment.
Nearly a century after the end of the Civil War and the dawn of Reconstruction, African Americans still found themselves fighting for their basic rights as citizens. The modern civil rights movement in the mid-20th century.
Oh, sorry. It's the meeting control. Okay.
Finally secured them.
Most historians actually date the start of the formal civil rights movement to Brown versus Board of Education. Brown really stokes the fervor of the nation. Then, in December of 1955, Rosa Parks decided as an act of resistance that she would not give up her seat to a white man on the bus.
Rosa Parks' deliberate act of resistance led to a bus boycott that thrust into the limelight a young preacher with a PhD. He would become one of the movement's most charismatic leaders. His name was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
One of the most iconic moments is the March on Washington in 1963, led by Martin Luther King Jr.
200,000 people converge on the nation's capital to rally for civil rights. They come united in one cause.
One day right now in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
This becomes visualized on the news and begins to change the way that Americans are starting to think about the civil rights movement.
As the civil rights movement attained greater visibility, it was often met with increased brutality and violence. Yet in the midst of so much sacrifice and heartbreak, the work of civil rights activists began to bear fruit.
In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of '64, and that's designed to desegregate businesses and government employment. And then in 1965, President Johnson signs the Voting Rights Act of '65.
The passage of the Voting Rights Act was a monumental victory for African Americans. Tragically, just 3 years after it was passed, Dr. King would be assassinated. Many feel, looking back, that the movement died that day. But in fact, the movement took on new forms and continued. And it must continue today, as important victories such as the Voting Rights Act are under attack.
until we deal with the fact that the backlash is often made possible not just by the other side growing in power, but by those who claim to care about equality losing their own resolve. There will be moments of this cycle happening over and over again.
Nearly a
Get going. So with that, I introduce you to your panel. It's being moderated today by Judge Michael Bagneris, class of 75, as well as joined by panelists, Professor Wendy Green, class of 2002, Christopher James, class of 2015, and our inaugural winner of the Janice Foster Emerging Leader Award. Followed by the world famous Ron Wilson, since he got a shout out by Sherilyn Eiffel last night, class of 1975, and then my classmate from the class of 1994, Judge Desiree Cook Calvin. I bring you here.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give a shout out to my classmate, Henry Gates. He was skipped all of us in college. With the Henry Gates, he is doing a remarkable job as it relates to the civil rights, and we're going to make sure that everybody's on the same page this afternoon in terms of the discussion that we're going to have as it relates to civil rights. So I'm going to toss out a question right quickly to my classmate when we were here in Tulane's Law School, to Ron Wilson, and ask Ron, what is civil rights and who's entitled to them?
It's like a law school question, Mike, who says no answer. You know, it's a very tough question because one could be one and not the other. For instance, you could have something which is a constitutional right, but not a civil right. And I say that, take for instance, the First Amendment, freedom of speech. That's clearly a constitutional right, but it's not a civil right. Oftentimes you hear people saying, you violated my constitutional right, you violated my civil rights, when it's neither one or the other or both. And I think in terms of civil rights, you think more, you sort of narrow the focus and think more in terms of who is protected, what is the protected class? And that scope has expanded quite a bit over the years. As to me, who is protected? Of course, you know, but people of color, females, as the court has recently ruled, based on your sexual orientation, you're protected. And an area that's expanding right now is the right of transgender individuals. That I see as a civil right. And so we just can't focus on race being the only civil right in existence. But I think it's much more expansive. And you look at, again, as I said, what is the protected class? And you stop at that point right there. And the Supreme Court has said in so many words, you know, who is and who isn't protected.
Anyone care to modify, amend, expand, or defer, or disagree? All right. And in that regard, and I have a question as it relates to does the concept of civil rights only apply to those that are not represented, or whether you refer to them as let me put it this way: do whites have civil rights?
Absolutely.
You said absolutely?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think our legal system has been very much shaped by the fact that whites were going to be afforded the panoply of civil rights, and those civil rights were going to be protected to the highest extent. And I guess I say more recently, in the 1970s, the Supreme Court said very expressly that civil rights laws, even though they were designed to protect African Americans, were not going to be limited to the protection of African Americans, that they were extended to whites, in particular white males. Like, for example, Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as the 14th Amendment, as well as the section 1981 of the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which was specifically about the racial equality, if you will, and equal treatment of African descendants. So if we think about it in terms of even now, when we look at civil rights cases being adjudicated under, say, Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that protects against racial discrimination in our workplaces, the cases that are most successful are those that are brought by, guess what? White men. So if we think about, like, in terms of, you know, whether or not white people are protected and have civil rights, frankly, even those laws that were designed for people of color to have equal protection are really being interpreted in ways and enforced in ways that are still maintaining say white individuals or white people to have the greatest amount of protection under our civil rights laws.
Let me ask this question though. Under 42 U.S.C. 1981, the right to contract. Wasn't the sole purpose of 42 1981 was to give African Americans the same right to contract as Caucasians?
Absolutely. It says very expressly that we should be able to contract in the same ways as white citizens. That is the express language in Section 1981. But that being said, the ways in which that particular section has been interpreted doesn't necessarily amount to that. And so in essence, yes, the laws were designed to try to bring about equal freedom and equal treatment, and namely as it relates to whites and white Americans and Black Americans, but doesn't necessarily mean that the laws have been interpreted in a way to really, you know, achieve that particular goal.
Well, if everybody, whites, blacks, Asians, are all entitled to the civil rights, why are we having this problem in terms of ensuring that the rights for any particular group is theirs if everybody is entitled to it? For instance, in the educational front, you know, when I was in law school, it was in Bakke, where Bakke was the issue on the educational line. Then following Bakke, there was a decision coming out of, well, started in Texas, the Fisher versus Texas decision, where the court, I think, finally got it right when we were talking about the fact that you can be race conscious in terms of admissions, because diversity is a positive thing if the reason for the race consciousness is to have a diversified student body. Yet we have now a lawsuit pending by the Harvard students from the Asian Harvard students and the students in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, where they're saying, hey, we are being discriminated against. We have some civil rights. We've all just admitted that everybody's got civil rights. So what's the deal with that? You know, how do we address that? Is the court off center by saying race consciousness is a positive thing, or how do we address, or what do you think will be the outcome? It's a better way of phrasing that. What do you think will be the outcome of the Harvard Asians?
Well, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I mean, I just think the writing's on the wall that more likely than not, the court is actually going to abolish race consciousness in decision-making, at least on the public context, or engaged in by governmental actors. But I don't think it would be surprising. I hope that is not surprising in terms of that particular outcome, because pretty much the 14th Amendment has been generally interpreted in a way to maintain white supremacy. And to deny, again, equal citizenship and equal freedom and inclusion in these spaces that are integral to our citizenship, like education or public higher education, for example. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I kind of sort of forecasting that that is going to be the case. It's been long in the making. And to the extent that they don't completely abolish it, then it will definitely, the use of race in admissions decisions and other types of governmental decisions is going to be even more limited than it already is, which is almost like no.
And talking about the field of education, I've been spending a lot of time in Florida lately, where the government just really gets off on CRT. And what it's an actual policy. Diversity is a dirty word in Florida. And not just Florida, you see it happening in Texas as well. So in terms of education, and I think the problem is we as civil rights people are ceding that ground, that territory to them. You see school board meetings, they're taking over and turning our school board meetings because we're not there. We're letting them do that. And before you know it, you can't teach this course, you can't teach that course. Florida, you can be imprisoned, you can be sued. For instance, if you have a class of 30 students, and all 30 students think that you're teaching CRT, they can sue you and get a minimum of $10,000. But we've ceded that territory to them. The legal defense fund's doing a lot of good stuff in that area, but we have to be present when all that's going down. So in the field of education, I guess that's as dangerous as any other area, because that's how kids are taught. That's how kids are learned. And we're getting back to Brown versus Board of Topeka when who's the famous sociologist, Kenneth Clark, where he gets famous Doll's test, asking kids, which one they prefer. Invariably, a little black kid preferred the white dolls. And that's what the governor of Florida, the governor of Texas, they want to use education to get back to that. So the word diversity, and I'm sure you hear it around Tulane's law school. One day when you weren't in class, in the labor law class, there was discussion. Eugene did a good job in one of your classes discussing affirmative action. But there, in our class of about 180, there were 5 African Americans, and I transferred in. So 4 had been admitted, 5 males, no females. And discussion that day was one white female in the class was offended, she said, because African American students through affirmative action were taking classes from spaces from well-deserving white students. Now it only made 4 out of 180. So our response was there shouldn't be any of this class. And she looked at it, assuming right away that the only way we could have gotten in, was through affirmative action. Mike went to Yale, Gene went to Dartmouth, and you say I can transfer it in. So no, it's an education field. That's the area, Mike, I think we have to look at, and we can't see that territory to them.
Along that line, if I may jump in, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to finally be on the mic a little bit. I will say, I think part of the issue is, right, when we're talking about equality from the standpoint of people who have had an advantage historically, right? That sounds like inequality or like oppression to them, right? When you're taking something away from me, even if it was something that I didn't actually earn on my own, but I have to give it up, that's a loss that I'm willing to fight over, that I'm willing to battle over. So even when we talk about, I forget the name of the organization, but we were talking about the Harvard students or the students at UNC, the Asian students, that they're being used strategically, right, by a person who founded an organization to bring about these types of legal questions, to try to bring about sort of this shift in jurisprudence that we're seeing right now. So like, it's not even them, right? You can't even necessarily look at Asian students per se and say that, this is their sort of strategy or this is their position, as much as they're being used to sort of further this struggle to claw back as much as possible in terms of diversity in education. And to Ron's point, extremely important when we talk about critical race theory, which is really history, right? Critical race theory is here, right? Like, and if, you know, for those of you who are students, you should take it. Professor Wesley, you should definitely take that class. It's really amazing. You'll be surprised, I think, that you get to sit in Tulane Law School and talk like that, right? Like, I know I was like, they're not gonna kick us out of here. All the things that we want to say and then we, you know, we communicate to each other through our content. We're talking about it, right? So, but that's critical race theory. That's law school saying, like, how does the legal system itself perpetuate white supremacy? They're not doing that in your average school where there's a school board. We're talking history. It's just that history plays out when you think about what has happened to our people. History plays out like a conspiracy theory, right? It's the truth. There's no theory to it. It's conspiracy, right? But it plays out like that. So when you think about redlining, right? And so controlling where Black people could live, which means controlling what property taxes they were going to pay, which means what schools that they have available to them, which meant, you know, what sorts of job prospects were they going to have? Generationally, what were the impacts of that in terms of where people live? Well, one of the impacts is most of us still live in the same places, right? If you look at the map, we're living in the same places that we were redlined into, decades ago. If you look at something like voting rights, right, and how they've been compromised along the lines of who lives where we gerrymander, so on and so forth. So all those things play out like a conspiracy if you know about them, right? If the people generally know about them, then that means you're going to want some accountability for that. You're going to want some atonement for those things. If you want atonement for those things, that means that advantage that I've had, that I'm willing to fight over, is going away. So we're trying to make sure that nobody learns that these things were done so that we never have to take accountability and undo them. And that is, essentially the work that we all should be busy trying to make happen, is that we have to actively undo and dismantle systems that were created to oppress people like us, and which were built to create and sort of perpetuate the outcomes that we're seeing in our communities that many people seem to think are inherently part of who we are. And they're not. They're conditions that we were given to work with. And if you put any group of people in those conditions, with that history, with that trauma, with those limitations, with that, disruption of family structure, you would get the same outcomes. Those are not things that are inherent to us because we are African-American or any other race.
But first of all, I'd like to ask the panelists, do the other three of you agree with Professor Green's viewpoint that the lawsuit that's presently pending is going to be the decision that's going to be rendered is going to be one that's going to knock down race consciousness as a tool?
I do.
You do. You do.
By virtue of the composition of the court, absolutely.
If that happens, then what is the impact to every other aspect of government and private enterprise that presently use race consciousness, like the area of employment? Right now, just about every municipality has a situation where if you're going to be working for that municipality, you have to have that evil word diversity. You have to have some kind of allotment to a diverse group, a diverse company, or minority company. What happens to those types of, the area of business contracts, the area of employment, not only in school, I mean, the area of voting, all of that comes into play. So are we saying now that every gain that has been made is now going to be snuffed out? Can somebody respond to that?
I'll start by saying, first of all, I think that is the right question. Those are the types of questions that we probably should have been asking ourselves for some years leading up to now, but here we are in the here and now. Hopefully in places throughout the country, we're having the same conversation because the time to develop the strategy for how to deal with this and what sort of legal challenges, if any, to make, what sorts of community strategies and development we're going to need to combat this. Those are conversations that should be well underway. Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a concerted effort, right, to make sure that we don't lose everything, to make sure that we, not on some marginal basis, but in the most sort of instrumental way, right, in the most deep way, that we support each other, that we support Black businesses, that we support, right, that we have to do these things, and to some extent, right, I think because we have been as a people resilient throughout history and we feel like we can overcome anything, we've overcome so much, right? Sometimes we can let ourselves get a little too complacent with that. No matter what they throw at us, we'll be okay. That may be true on some level. On some level, we've always had to be. Look at the people in this room, right? We got to this room, for those of us who were here or attended here or somewhere else. We got there being taught and being told we had to be 10 times better than, right? So we will still have to, to maneuver in those ways to break down those barriers or to break those glass ceilings again. But at the same time, there needs to be a deeper and more long-term strategy for how we move forward as a people in light of, what could be some really, really challenging times coming up.
And Chris, your point is well taken when you say long-term. If you look at the onslaught of what they've done to the Supreme Court, they didn't think about that overnight. That's started after Roe versus Wade. And they're the same people who get long-term view towards dismantling the Supreme Court or restructuring it, are the same people behind the Harvard lawsuit, same people behind the North Carolina lawsuit. And they've thought long-term, and in some cases, they're on the verge of accomplishing their objective with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is a rogue body. There's no other way you can describe it. One justice, the Chief Justice's wife, has made over $1 million working for a placement service. I can't say enough about the Yale graduate, Mr. Clarence Thomas. I can't say enough about him, but right, we have to think in terms of a long-term game plan. I find that when you're young, you think in terms of immediacy. How soon can it happen? But you look at, I do past 30 or 40 years or so voting rights, and I see how for years they wanted to dismantle Section 5, well, the pre-clearance provision, Section 5. And again, they didn't try it overnight, it didn't happen. But then once it happened, the floodgates came open. The day after, North Carolina, Texas, and places like that imposed these very stringent requirements, which make it not only impossible to vote, but it makes you afraid to vote. The fact that if you think you're going to go to jail or be incarcerated for voting, you may be reluctant to even try to cast a ballot. So, that's, again, the voting thing, for them, has been very, very long-term. And we have to think also in terms of, the long-term.
I would just add to this conversation that every game is up for grabs. And the changes that we want, or the things that we want to keep in place, we have to be willing to go to jail. And the changes that were made, my grandmother, I'm just talking about my history, I can visibly see that. My grandmother, Virginia Young Collins, went to jail so she could vote. And she, not only that, she taught other people what they needed to know so they could vote. So we have to do whatever we have to do. That means go to jail. We have to have that in our minds. And it's not going to just come from the top down. It's going to have to come from the bottom up, because she was just a regular person that pressed my hair, made tea cakes, banana fritters. She was a grandmother, but she still fought for what was important in our community. And we need people like that, that are willing to do whatever it takes. So that's what I would like to.
I'll just add one more thing. I think all of these attacks that we're seeing in so many different areas that you're pointing out as it relates to education and voting rights and employment, the exercise of our freedom of speech, in so many different ways that are related to race, and in particular, I think to African descendants really being able to really enjoy all of these rights. It really, all of these spaces are so intrinsic to not only our citizenship, but to our freedom. And so we are literally fighting for our freedom. And so I think that when we really think about it, that we think of it from a historical lens, when we talk about like emancipation and abolition, yes, we were fighting for our freedom then, but we're continuing to fight for our freedom. And I think, and even though we think, yes, relatively speaking, we are more free than maybe our ancestors, but slavery is still happening, segregation is still happening, Jim Crow is still alive and well in so many different respects. And so I think it's really important for us to just recognize, even in the 21st century, that we continue to fight for our freedom. And if we don't fight for it, then who's going to do that? So in whatever capacity that we're in, whatever role that we're playing, we're constantly having to fight for liberation and to really try to preserve liberation, because as we are becoming more free, there's always going to be opposition to that. And so to that point, we can't be reactionary. We have to be very proactive and thinking long-term, because this is a long-term strategy since day one. To maintain white supremacy has been a strategy since day one. And what this is all about, is trying to maintain that level of racial supremacy, racial hierarchy, and what I would call a racial caste system in the United States, and abroad. So this is, and to that point, is not only a domestic fight, this is an international fight as it relates to Black people in terms of really fighting for our freedom, not only in the United States, but abroad. So to that point, I guess I just will say is that, again, we're literally fighting for our freedom in so many different ways, and we have to be proactive as opposed to reactive in terms of that, and being vigilant. Because white supremacy is persistent and is vigilant, and we have to be just as persistent, if not more persistent and vigilant, in ensuring that hopefully that in ensuring that this kind of racial hierarchy is dismantled.
Let me throw a question out for you.
Freedom.
If you look at the earlier civil rights movements, the March on Washington, the Selma March, it brought together a broad coalition of people. Black, white, Jew, Christian, is that coalition there? And of that coalition?
I don't think that coalition is dead at all. I think, I don't want to say too much. I don't know who, who might be listening, but but there are coalitions of folks now, especially like, Black, Indigenous, people of color organizations and groups that work in a national network of different people coming together to work on legislative issues and so on and so forth. There's just a need to see more of that, I think, in front of the scenes, right? And in communities where sometimes we can get pigeonholed within our own sorts of maybe at least to other groups considered niche issues, as opposed to recognizing that we are, all connected, that we're all related, that our plights to some degree are all connected and related. You start with one group and then you make your way, taking the rights from each. And so I think that coalition definitely still exists, but is not as visible as it has been in the past. And I also think, there's a reckoning, and I'll touch on this and then we'll move on if we can, but it has to be said, right? There's a need also for us to ensure that we're remembering queer people, right? When we talk about the LGBTQ community, right, whose rights are always at stake right now, there are some of us who may be a little bit more okay with that, or historically have been, or institutions of ours that have been. And we have to realize that our plight is connected to theirs, right? That if literally that none of us are free unless we are all free. And so that means you can't be, silent when you see other groups going through, whatever their struggles may be, that we have to be willing to get into the fight with them. That so many of them have studied what Black people have done in the movements and the organizations that we've formed to do the work that they're doing now. And so there's an ability to bring all of those groups together to show that synergy between those groups and to develop strategies together and be stronger together than we are individually.
I realize I'm the moderator and I'm not supposed to answer questions, but I can't help myself. I don't think it's a question of the coalition being dead. I do believe that it's dormant right now, and the reason for that is as long as you had these gains that were made, and we had the gains that were made, and that while it wasn't enough, that was satisfactory or satisfying to those individuals who were behind the boat marches that you mentioned, and they were successful in achieving that goal in terms of having either the laws passed or the judicial decisions rendered that they were looking forward to. And then you had sort of a relaxation, if you will. And it happens and it was also, and I don't want to say fault, but that's the first word that came to mind. It was also the fault of those individuals of not transferring to their children everything that had to be done, and how even though they had accomplished what they set out to do, that the job wasn't finished. And that now the baton had to be passed, and you have to know what your history is, what people went through in order to achieve the gains that were attained. And now you have the baton and you have to move forward. And I'm gonna be candid, I'm looking for those baton carriers, to deal with the aspect. I had one young man, because I teach sometimes. I had one young man who had come to me and told me that it was a worthless fight because, and listen to his reasoning, he said, we are what he referred to as a yo-yo community. The Black community is a yo-yo community because they will toss the yo-yo out, they'll toss it out, give you those gains to quiet you out, quiet you off, tired of this, all right? Give you the gains. And then years later, what do? Take it right back. Everybody, Roe v. Wade was never supposed to, that was supposed to be the law of the land forever. Took it back. Baki, which I'm tired of hearing that name. It's like, really? It's like the Black woman said the other day, I'm tired of being tired. It's a situation where I don't think it's dead, but we better start rattling some sabers, and I didn't comment on this. I'm gonna do like you, I don't know who's listening. I didn't comment on this, but I do know this. As laws progressive laws that had impact us are being reduced or being limited or being abolished. The only thing that comes to many minds is the riots that took place. You cannot constantly beat a people down and not expect some violent reaction to occur. You just can't. And if you do, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself. So I pray, and unfortunately, I agree with the panelists in terms of the outcome of the case. But I pray that we are wrong. And I know you do too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I know you do too, but I don't see it.
One thing we have to think about, Mike, I think the abnormal has become the normal. And I think what happened with the Voting Rights Act of '65 was when Lyndon Johnson saw the Black people being slaughtered in the streets. And not only that, the nation was offended by that. If that happened today, would the nation be offended? you have an insurrection with this thing, was a walk in the park. So I think people have become, for nefarious reasons, desensitized.
Yeah,
And that's one of the problems nowadays, where things that happen now, people get shot on the street and what do people say? He deserved it, he shouldn't have run. How do I know what he did or didn't do? And I think that's the major difference now between now and what happened in the sixties. That the nation was sensitized towards, the plight of, disadvantaged people. And I don't know if we're there anymore.
Well, I would probably disagree with that just a little bit. Because I do think that, in the midst or the height of the pandemic, not only domestically, but internationally, we did see a lot of people who were not African descendant who actually cared for Black lives. And we're trying to activate and advance things on behalf of Black lives. And I do see it in my students as a law professor. I see it in my colleagues, a level of awareness as it relates to anti-Blackness that frankly, I have not seen before. And even in the work that I do sometimes as a DEI consultant sort of on the side, and also, advancing legislation as it relates to race-based natural hair discrimination and its consequences, I'm seeing multicultural coalition building. And frankly, that's the way that even this legislation or even this kind of legal reforms to address, again, a longstanding form of racial discrimination, specific and systematically impacting African descendants can even occur. So I can't, so I guess I just a little bit of a disagreement on that, in that I do believe that there are people, and I see it every day. Now, to what degree will those individuals become fatigued? Now that's another question, because I do see that as well, some fatigue. But I think that's kind of like inherent if you are really trying to be not an ally, but if you're trying to be an advocate, on behalf of people, there is going to be that level of fatigue, and hopefully we can restore and replenish and then get back out there again. And I hope that my colleagues who are not Black or African descendant will do the same in the days and months and years ahead, especially as we are probably going to be presented with these legal decisions that are going to impact us pretty disastrously, potentially. So I see more of that. And I think that's a big part of why we're even seeing, these anti-CRT bills. It's not only because, but the focus has been centered around Blackness, and we're seeing the Black power really being powerful and empowering, but because white children are being transformed, white people are being transformed, not only in the United States, but around the world as it relates to anti-Blackness, as it relates to racial inequality, as it relates to advantages that have been unearned, that have been politically and legally, socially constructed and maintained and preserved for hundreds of years. So they're becoming aware of a lot of things that they may not have necessarily been aware of in the past because of the lack of education in our school systems, or just the lack of conversations within their families and their communities as it relates to this. And I think that's a big part of why we have the legislation today, because it's about, white children and white adults really becoming not only empathetic, but actually becoming not only allies, but advocates as it relates to trying to combat anti-Blackness, and even more broadly, trying to combat racial inequality, and thus probably dismantling, again, even their own conscious or unconscious notions about white supremacy and about whiteness. It's being questioned in a way that can lead to some real transformational change. And dare I say, what many conservatives might actually try to advance is like the thing that they always talk about, colorblindness. Yeah. Actually achieve that. And that's not what they want, right? Not at all. I mean, you can espouse that, but that's not really what you want, because colorblindness, again, is going to undermine racial hierarchy, a racial caste system designed to maintain white supremacy.
oh,
Sorry. Okay, that's it for me.
wait. We were going to wait, but I think that's crazy. I saw you first and then you, Romy. Lady with the hat.
I want to, piggyback on Professor Green's comments, and I'm so sorry to interrupt with, because I couldn't sit here anymore. My classmate, full disclosure, Oxford Fair class of 2002. And I just want to say that, to your point, Mr. Wilson, is that part of the reason why no one recognizes the current civil rights movement as it has evolved is because it doesn't look the same. It's not, it's decentralized, right? So it's not hierarchical, it's not built around, say, male-centered leadership like Dr. King or Malcolm X or or something like charismatic leader. And what I would suggest is everyone should read Alicia Garza's book, The Purpose of Power, right? She's a co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and she explains absolutely what, the current movement is and the current moment is, right? And so I think that that's really, you all are, so I guess that, like I said, that's why you probably don't recognize when you say that, oh, the civil rights movement is it dead or whatever, or what iteration we are. I think it's very much alive and palpable when you saw so many people come to the streets, literally, during the pandemic, as Professor Green says, literally, sometimes organically, and saying literally Black Lives Matter. My favorite point and anecdote during that time was from London. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. I'm like, what the hell? So it's up to us to harness that and challenge and channel it, right? So you can't just take that, because all of that, energy needs to be funneled somewhere. It needs to be funneled somewhere constructively. And again, I'm going to refer back to Ms. Garza, and she got some really important, ways that we can do that. But I'll just give you one to the point, Mr. McNair's, about the long game. I agree with you. So if we even just look at, where we are in terms of understanding the Supreme Court's, decisions and where we're anticipating them to go and how they've been, working on this for 50+ years. Where's our Federalist Society? At every law school in America, there's a Federalist Society, right? Why is there no equivalent? Why can't BALSA be that balanced, right? Why can't we be strategizing proactively and saying, what are we going to do, right? So we have to think, I think, but we got to be pragmatic, and we got to take that energy, right, and really channel it in a thoughtful way, and really do be thinking about what is the plan of action. And I'll see the floor.
Like to join the
Class of 2002 representing. I love it.
Just to piggyback on the comments of this brilliant scholar, we have a whole bunch of lawyers in this room, and I'm not complaining about the Black Lives Matter movement, but my question to the panelists, and maybe for a few of you is rhetorical, is what do we do as Black lawyers? Because everybody in here is from some community, but when a Ron Wilson or others, or Bill Quigley, are in a fight for a Black Supreme Court jurist to be placed in her seat in a city like New Orleans, which is probably common everywhere in this country, with all of us as Black lawyers. I'm not talking about the Black folk, Black Lives Matter marching. What charge do we take as Black lawyers? And as Wayne shared with me earlier, we as Black lawyers need to play the long game and the short game. The struggle has never changed. I think what we have done as Black lawyers is we have lost how to strategize. Yeah. We have lost how to face the challenges. And then when those lawyers like Ron Wilson and others achieve their goals strategically to fight for the rights of others, all of us come out. I was with you, Chief. I was, but for those calls, those strategy calls where that target is on that lawyer's back, so many of us who are challenged and educated and gifted, for whatever reason, we choose not to do it. And we're always too quick and too busy to be reactionary. So when are we as a legal community going to figure out? I don't care if you wasn't a constitutional scholar, but Tulane taught us all how to read a document, how to argue and articulate a thought. And if you go back to your communities and all you do is you don't want to run for school board, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that, and then you want to get together and talk about how bad it is, that's not going to change. It's not a strategy. To go back to wherever we go to do what we do. Otherwise, all those big checks you get and the beautiful home you live in, because at some point you got to get to your house. You got to get to your house. And yeah, that bottom-up strategy, well, you know, people don't, if they fighting about it, they don't know who you are, nor do they care. All they know is here you are, been gifted with an education. And you've done what? For what? Just to say, well, yeah, I want somebody else to get in the fight. And I don't mean to call you out, Ron, but I've shared that conversation with you and others before about, you know, you're on the spot. That target is on your back, right? But the same issues for Ron Wilson exist in every community in this country, for all of us, for folk who look like us. And for us to sit back and watch, forget the compilation of the Supreme Court. Those folk gonna do what they do anyway. We're watching this tragedy happen in real time, and all we're doing is having a conversation about the obvious. And I like it. It's good. It's theoretical. It's intellectual. But at some point, we need to challenge ourselves and figure out how in the hell are we gonna learn to get back in the fight again? Because we've all been taught to fight. Let's just figure it out.
I'm just gonna say, read Alicia's book. Seriously, she lays it out. As somebody who built a movement from nothing, right? And it became global. I think that's a voice that needs to be heard.
And actually, this is good timing because the last point on my agenda was, what do we do about it? But at any rate, let's keep moving. This lady.
I want to get response to what he asked. He asked another question. I'd like to hear what the panel has.
Well, that's what I thought we were gonna get with these comments. All right, maybe not.
I can stand up. Good afternoon, I'm Tanisha Manning, a graduate, a 2020 graduate. And it is in response, and it's a layered question that Black communities are afraid to approach. I'm young, I'm 28. I have a nonprofit called Engaged Voters. We educate on the ballot for 18 to 35-year-old Black voters who don't vote because they don't understand the ballot. They don't understand the structure. I'm privileged because I do, right? And so the question becomes not what are we doing, because I believe there is a new generation of MLKs. We definitely exist. There is a movement, but has the institutions that do exist, have you created space for us?
Right.
And we don't like to talk about that because it seems an attack and a front on NAACPs, right? On these institutions that create the foundation, that have taught us. But do they really create? Then I get in these conversations. I did not, unfortunately, go to the keynote last night, but I'm a policy advisor for an elected official. We talk about this all day and I get frustrated because we talk about the problem. Trying to hire new staff. I told Judge Roby it's hard to find good work. And am I given that space to really elevate the issues that we know and see exist? So is the problem really that we're not doing anything? Are we really creating room for all of the orgs that are doing something? Because the question that I ask is, why did I create my organization? Because there are gaps in the ones that do exist.
Yeah.
But there are also some of us who approach those organizations and try to work within. But I think it's a layered conversation that we really need to address, because there are more of you that exist in this room that are my age or younger that are trying to do this work, but we don't really acknowledge that, right? So that's, I think it is, we're doing it, but what's really happening is, are we culturally allowing our community to all have room, a seat at the table? And this is a generational question, not necessarily affinity groups, it's generational now.
Yes, hi, I just wanted to add to the conversation, for those of you that were here last night, I'm a sociologist. But and so I'm gonna invoke my book, You Can't Stop a Revolution. And so I coined 21st century Black resistance, beginning with Ferguson. the Ferguson Uprising. It is the first time in the 21st century where we have more than 400 days of sustained Black direct action since the Montgomery bus boycott. And so that is the start of what we are talking about, what is happening, what is going on. The movement is a continuum. It is a collective. On the ground, the understanding is that we are not leaderless, we're leader folk. That is strategic, because one particular leader being identified means having the world target them as MLK, target them as Malcolm X, target them. So the idea is to never have, and maybe I'm sharing too much, but I'm just saying, the idea is to not have one particular person become the target or the absolute go-to, because then the dynamic is that if you kill them, you kill the movement. And so again, the mission on the ground is we are leaderful, not leaderless. We exist in a world where there is Black death porn. And so the fact that we don't know that there are organizations like what she just spoke about, her organization, or all these different efforts and things like that that are happening, these grassroots efforts that are playing out, is because the narrative along with the fact that we exist with on these news cycles, right? We are a society that moves and grooves according, and we sort of idealize the changing of news cycles as if that is verbatim of fact for our community. And it's not. It doesn't mean that because we no longer see Black folks working or running from tear gas and rubber bullets, that somehow the effort has stopped. No, that just makes great for the next headline. And so I'm saying that to say that, and then I'm gonna sit down, but there are just so many layers, and that's kind of what I have been able to capture, even in You Can't Stop the Revolution. The fact that we are working from different lanes, but what most people zoomed in on, because what was captured was not the effort that the grassroots efforts that were happening outside and beyond us running from tear gas and rubber bullets and standing under tanks. That's what the world tuned into. What people didn't see were those stop the violent marches that were happening outside of those mediums, those strings. What people did not see were the Black folks that were collectively working and setting up food pantries and things like that on vacant lots in those communities around Ferguson. What people did not see were Black folks holding town hall meetings because they were mad about vacant buildings being in their neighborhood. What people did not see, do you see what I'm saying? I can go on. And so then what we have is these new narratives that come out of our community. We ain't doing nothing, we doing it all. It's just not being covered.
Come on now.
Just want to throw that out there. And then lastly, I'll say this. You mentioned how, if these rollbacks happen with, the diversity in that sense. And so as a sociologist, some of the things that I look at particularly is, the articulate, the language and the words and things like, which I know that you all do as well. But one sure way to get around some of this, because we know that there's diversity and it was discussed last night. We know that there are diversity clauses in all these different spaces and places. But one of the new strategic things seem to be is now how do we define racial categories? So there's a reconstructing of Black that is taking place. There's a reconstructing of what does diversity mean? So see, there's some games that's being played and even how folks are strategically starting to offer up some of the language, some of these words, and what they now might mean that become loopholes for how to navigate around eliminating DEI and all sorts of things. So I just wanted to throw that out there for food for thought.
Thank you.
But we as a people, aren't we allowing the system to define who leaders are and who represents Black people? I may be stepping on some toes, But I get offended when I see on television, some guy who jumps on an airplane and flies around the country every time some black man is murdered. And they're calling him a civil rights attorney. Finding who our leaders are. So, yeah, some people here may take issue with that. But you talk to the attorneys in here, talk to Clarence, talk to Wayne, people who've done civil rights work. Nobody knew this guy before black people started getting killed. You know, so, but the media, they define this guy as a black leader. And why is that we as a race of people of the only race that has to have a leader?
Right.
You don't even want to say the Chicano leader, the Jewish leader. Why is it black people? You know, that they can determine who our leaders are going to be. And that's the problem we have to deal with. You know, we're letting other people define us. And it's time for that to stop. You know, we're allowing them to dictate the terms of engagement. You know, it's time to put a halt to that. You know, so as I said, we can't have some, I don't know what you call me, but I'll shut up.
You won't drop his ad. You should drop his ad.
That Mr. James talked about, which is allies. And one of the things that frustrates me in these conversations is we don't have outside the community on these panels.
Can't hear you.
One of the things that frustrates me about these conversations is that we don't have others in the conversation, because we used to have allies and used to have people that were wanting a whole solution because we all wanted the same thing. And I know I see this in the federal government, specifically with my practice area. I've never had a person of color as a mentor, as a manager, supervisor, mentor. Everyone I have worked with in this space across agencies, they're usually Caucasian, they're usually male, and I will have some females, a sprinkling of Asians and a sprinkling of Hispanics. And I would say the most diverse agency I work with that makes policies is DHS, and it's mostly Hispanic. And I will say in a prior administration, you know, there was an acknowledgement by one of my white male coworkers of, I've never seen so many white men in government. They were just not used to it, but no one talked about it. It's like, that's why you talk in a decision process. I'm not the one making the hiring decisions. I'm not the one bringing people in. And I think it would be very important because there are those allies there who want to be part of the conversation and want to be part of the solution, because they don't want a homogenous society. They don't want a homogenous workforce because they have recognized diversity, the value of it, you know, diverse families. I mean, it's having homogenous families is just not the way of the future right now. And it would be very interesting to hear what other faculty from the department, from Tulane University or other parts who are not specifically within this community, that share similar ideas and values about how to have a collective solution. So the comment you made about the LGBTQ community, you know, when we had like the first through the pandemic, we have diversity days all the time. We didn't have anything that month during the pandemic. I said, well, can we do something virtually? Like, okay, sure, well, you do it. Fine, I did. Member of the community, but I want to acknowledge and understand it. And I think that that part of the conversation is missing and needs to be part of it, because it's not just going to be a solution from just women on their issues, LGBTQ on their issues, or people of color on their issues. It is a collective conversation, and that's what's always missing.
Thank you. I mean, can I, what do you want to do? Mr. Martin?
You want to comment on that?
Sure.
You comment on that and then I'll take you, sir.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for that comment. I would say, to summarize, one of my favorite things to say when people are asking me, sort of what should we be doing about structural racism? My answer is, and I think you all should try this, right? If you ever end up in that conversation, as mostly Black folks in this room, well, once you start asking all the white people in this space that same question, then we can get somewhere. You're asking me, the person who's experiencing that, who's like a victim of that to some degree, who's suffering through that. And I have perspective, certainly, right? Certainly you should want to hear what I have to say, but this can't only be my issue to solve, right? Is essentially the point that's being made. There are so many things that I would love to talk to, and I will. I want to respect the moderator and get to the next question, but I'll definitely come back to feedback on some of the points that have been made already.
And let me say, you're free to speak with the, any panelists immediately after this. Yes.
Yeah, last night about getting involved, with our recent elections. And, what my company did was we started a nonprofit. And what we did was we looked for organizations such as the New Georgia Project, to partner with, to try to get out the vote and do whatever it is that we could in order to get out the vote. I go to a predominantly white church, in a liberal part of town. They're like, hey, get those folks to vote. On a plan. So that's what my company did. We went in there and these guys were all allies, liberals who wanted to help us get out the vote. They were appalled by what they saw, et cetera, et cetera. The more I worked with them, I realized we had a different definition of
Allyship.
yeah. They weren't fighting for equality. I wanted equity. Okay, and I wasted a lot of time and money before I realized that although we both wanted diversity, yeah, they were looking for equality. I was looking for equity. So I guess I'm looking for better methods to figure out who exactly the allies are. So I'm not wasting time and money in the future when I'm attempting these goals.
Yeah, and I guess.
Go ahead.
Really quickly, to that point, I try to tell my students all the time, I don't want to really engage in so-called allyship. I need you to be an advocate. I need you to be an activist. Because again, to your point, it can't be all on our shoulders to do all the work. We get tired. I'm tired. I can't speak for y'all, but I'm tired. And so I need you to be able to be educated and knowledgeable enough to engage in the action, the real action, the substantive action, the long-term action that it really takes to bring about equity, right? So I think that's an important part in terms of like discerning who's an ally versus who's a real advocate / activist in whatever the fight is. If it's a fight against anti-Blackness, it's a fight against, whatever the issue may be. And I think that's really, really important there. Because if we're expecting allies to actually like bring about substantive change, then yeah, you are going to be disappointed. And the status quo is going to be maintained. And again, the work is going to still be back on our shoulders. And I won't even get into the legal part of that, but nonetheless, just I think that's really important. So I really just tried to even stop using that language, because again, I think that's something that's been propagated by the media in terms of like white allyship in particular. And that really what we really are asking for and needing are advocates and activists in this fight against racism, and in particular, I say anti-Black racism.
We're getting real close, to time, in terms of any time. And there was one little exercise that I wanted to try to deal with that I think is a very small part of a response to the question that Attorney Roby posed. First of all, do we have anyone here from Georgia? Okay. First of all, let me say how grateful I am, and I think the Black nation is to Georgia. And for all those, and for those individuals who waited 9 hours in line in order to vote, and when you have and the networking that came in to make sure that those people stayed in line to cast that ballot, who brought them food and water while they were in line, kudos to them as well. But this is the question, this is a little exercise. The Georgia legislature is entertaining a law to knock down or to make it impossible for folks to feed or give water to to the people in line. That was a question you was gonna pose? Sorry?
Texas.
Texas is already there. The question, so in terms of what do, the agenda kind of thing, we know that the reason for the stated reason, I'm sorry, not stated, the reason is to suppress Black vote, okay? That's the real reason. What's the stated reason for that particular, what was the stated reason in Texas?
The increase in the 2020 election, the increase in,
The state agrees that they likened it to some sort of bribery or inducing people to influence votes. Yeah,
Like paying for the vote.
paying for votes.
By giving them a bottle of water, okay. All right, well, we really cheap. Yeah. Sorry?
Yes, we'll do.
Right, okay, now, as attorneys or students, in-law, what's your response to that particular stated reason? Come on, we talked about an agenda to move, to strike down those particular laws that are suppressing.
Somebody's got.
Yeah.
Right, if you're forcing a person, a human being to stand in the sun for 9 hours to exercise their right, you would have to provide them with, water, bathroom services, or what have you, to be able to be able to exercise their right to vote. So it seems like by depriving them of water, depriving them of use of bathroom space and putting them out in the elements, that, in effect, you are depriving that group of people of their civil rights.
You're right, because
And there's something too. I was one of those people that gave out water as a full chaplain. And we don't say who we're affiliated with. We don't say we're a Democrat or Republican. We are different colors, different genders, and all we do is give out the water. So it could be a Republican that I'm giving the water to. Does the argument still hold that? I'm trying to buy the vote.
yeah, ask Abbott, but I think one thing that you'll have to say is, that giving out the water is a cherry on top of the situation. Because first what they did was they got rid of all the polling places in minority areas. They made it impossible for people to be able to go and vote in a reasonable manner. And so then they did, okay, so you gotta go all the way out of your way, you gotta wait a long line, have all these issues. And on top of that, we won't give you water. And so I think not looking at the water situation, but going back to the base of the issue, fighting at the base of the issue, how do we get our polling places back? At Prairie View A&M, on the college site, they shut down a polling place where students had to drive, hours to get to a polling location. And that's that completely undermines.
Has anybody challenged has that law been challenged in Texas?
There is pending lawsuits to challenge it, but I always say, at what point do we start playing their game, amending the legislation? Because everybody wants to be in it. It's not gonna happen in a GOP-led legislation. So when you start, okay, here's ban water for up to 4 or 5 hours, then, play the game with them until you begin to, because we know we're gonna be exposed for longer than 3 hours in some places. So then say, okay, up to 3 hours, then no water. It may or may not pass, but it's like really hard to start, passing laws that still align with what you originally wrote anyways. And I know that's a dangerous game to play too, but we are in desperate times. And so it's really gonna cost, they're not gonna ban it, they're not gonna uplift it completely. So we have to really start thinking strategically, how do we make these laws work and I'm not a legislator to that. Yeah.
Isn't there a certain period of time, I'm not a criminal lawyer, haven't practiced a day in crime, you do criminal law? Isn't there a certain period of time that you cannot hold a prisoner without provide them with water if he or she asks for it. I mean, you can't deprive, but so a suspected murderer has a higher degree of right than somebody trying to cast a ballot, but yes, ma'am.
I'm probably, I think the argument is you can bring your own water,
Mhm.
right? So, but at the same time, like even voting in the runoff, yeah, there are fewer voting locations and there were literally 2 voting, like the actual stations in the voting list. So that's why the line was long. So there are fewer places to vote, and then when you do vote, there's 1 or 2 places to vote at that place. So, I think that's where I mean, I don't know what to do about that, but I feel like that's a bigger problem that no one's really talking about, in addition to the lack of places. to vote.
And before I call someone that we can go.
So I'm not gonna be the time bully.
If not, I'm gonna keep going.
Trying to say lawyers should be on the move because we're partying tonight, y'all. Gotta get your nails done.
I haven't talked to anyone afterwards, but I think this, you know, in accordance with Attorney Roby said, my personal thing right now is if we look, we look at the voting rights, that as a people, we need to get together and not Georgia, Texas, and all the USA. We need to go ahead and start dealing with our Federalist Society and go ahead and create that agenda that we need to ensure that our voices will always be heard. And it will be heard in numbers so that we don't have to have the Trumps of the world.
I'm out of order, Judge, but can I say this? I think the other thing is that we have to use the tools that we have, because we have to use the tools that we have, because while we're talking about, I mean, what we're talking about right here is what happens when you go to vote in person on election day. Right? In a lot of states, in a lot of places, we have early voting, and quite frankly, we're not taking advantage of it. That was, you know, there's absentee, but I'm saying in different places, and we are not doing it. So, you know, I'm not home right now, but I'm getting messages, you know, when there's the election, I guess, what was it? The I think a congressional seat, and they were just talking about the Senate seat, I'm sorry. And they were talking about Black voters going out to do early voting. We were at less than 10% here in Louisiana. I'm not saying that's everywhere else, but we need to go back and look at what are the tools that we have, and are we using all of them? That's got to be part of the strategy.
Yes.
There have to be and making sure that we're doing that, because when you have early voting and you have 10 days of early voting, if we're not using it, taking it.
And that's-
Why should we give you voting from 6 to 8 o'clock at night if you're not voting?
We agree with your comment. My point simply is that you're gonna have different suppressed strategies in different states. But the key thing is everybody is trying to suppress. Everybody's trying to suppress. We know that. So as a people, we can get together, you know, and formulate that strategy, you know, that strategy in terms of now, what do we have to implement to overcome what the adverse parties are trying to do? With that, I'll leave it.
I'm gonna say thank you, Tim, but one thing that we came out of the.
So for Tanisha and some of our younger alums and future alums to be, I think part of what came out of the discussion is the need to strategize and to have our own Federalist Society, which really is your boss. This is this room. This is your Federalist Society. And I think it's inculcating kind of some of these themes. And what do we as this group, how do we harness the power that Sherilyn Ifill so eloquently spoke about? So maybe that's, here's my suggestion, here's my action. during our farewell brunch, you will find on your table a survey. It's really just to give us feedback here at the institution, like what can we do better with this event? And I think what I'm hearing from this room is that you want this event to be actionable, to leave here with things to do and take back in your communities to act and to be the Black lawyers on the move. And that was our theme for this particular event. And I'm glad that it's kind of ended with that. What do we do next? So I invite you during your time at brunch tomorrow, because we're not going to do it during the soiree, Judge, because that's all about having community fun. I'll call it that. But I just invite you to use the comment section and make the proposal of what you want to do or how we should do this, how you all can perhaps come together collectively with our current BALSA students. There's no reason with Zoom and Teams that you all as a community can't connect on a real way, monthly or bi-monthly, whatever that may be. Tanisha, as former BALSA president, I'm gonna put that on your plate, as well as Michelle Domain. And I don't know if Natalie's here, but you all are able to come up creatively, I think, with that bridge that I think is needed. So
And before
that's
we
my
leave-
call.
Before we leave,
Yes.
I think everybody ought to thank Tanya.
Yeah. I just say, it really is a village, and some people who are not here and all around the building, I want to just call out one in particular, my colleague, Saya Smith, who is a Harvard educated lawyer, but she's put a lot of love and thought into, joining this team and just joining this community and wanting the best for all of us. So she's not here because she's doing something else. We call her the general. She's always doing something else. So enjoy. We look forward to seeing you all tonight. Who else? Gifts. I didn't know we had gifts. Okay, there we go. Gifts are coming. Thank you, panel. Thank you so much. See you all tonight.